You're listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Get ready to go against the grain. We have another good show for you today. Today we'll be discussing the political climate in Brazil in the context of Bolsonaro's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. A little later in the hour, we'll get into the attempts to remove Sanders from the presidential primary ballot in New York using the obscure provision signed into law by Cuomo 5 days after Sanders suspended his campaign. Sanders has sent a letter stating his desire to get as many delegates as possible, but after suspending his campaign, will he have a leg to stand on? Beyond whether or not he can remain on the ballot, doesn't even matter that since he's suspended his campaign. We'll also get into the latest events on Julian Assange's extradition hearing that was originally scheduled to take place this morning. In the second hour, we'll go into the Democratic playbook of choosing a man for president that you would not feel safe leaving alone in a parked car, then blame people who don't vote for that guy as if it's their responsibility to get that particular Democratic candidate elected. Let me assure you, it is not. We'll also get into the rent strike taking place across the United States, in addition to the Bernie Biden task force on criminal justice. Last but not least, we'll have our weekly Miss the Press segment, where we get to lampoon Sunday morning talking heads as they propagate the narratives of the ruling class and label it quote-unquote news. Quote-unquote news. But let's start here. Do you guys remember, I think it was earlier in the month, where Joe Biden, Simone Sanders, and a Republican legislature in Wisconsin kept pushing for the Wisconsin election to be held, even with the governor saying, let's not do this. Joe Biden wanted to get over the finish line as fast as possible. The Republicans wanted to get their Supreme Court pick over the finish line as fast as possible, and having the election on that particular day, despite being in the middle of a pandemic, despite people like me saying this is a horrible idea, you're going to make people sick, you're going to get people ill, they still went along with that election. Right now, this is the Daily Beast reporting. According to NPR News, WUWM, Milwaukee Health Commissioner Jeanette Kalawalik said Friday that 40 people have been infected. Jeanette, who said her department is finalizing data that it hopes to release on May 1st, said earlier in the week that 7 cases have been linked to in-person voting in the state. Health experts have differed on the impact of Wisconsin's election due to the outbreak. Now, the reason is because it's difficult to isolate something entirely to one specific point. But you can't point to it and say probability shows that more likely than not, somebody was going to get sick in an area where you had a large infection. The catch here is Wisconsin's numbers have been spiking recently. And it is difficult to find things to point to other than that particular election, even though there may be other sources of contact. This was infinitely foreseeable. You're in the middle of a viral pandemic, and in increased closeness of quarters, the potential for that particular virus being appropriated by somebody else goes up. In fact, the World Health Organization came out recently saying about immunity, realizing that, well, wait a minute, we don't even know if there's an immunity that's created from a person getting the virus. Recent reporting came out saying that the virus can just linger in a closed quarter for a period of hours, potentially days. Add all this up. And now let's go to Wisconsin again. Wisconsin has had thousands of people show up at a protest over the weekend. On Friday. All of these people blew off all notions of social distancing in order to crowd into the Capitol in order to protest the social distancing guidelines. Meaning, some of them were saying we want to rescind the governor. Some others said we want to rescind the protests themselves. Other people say we will prefer death over communism. Think about that. Death over communism. We're talking about a lockdown for like maybe 3 months. This has only been like a month and maybe a week or two. And they're calling it communism, saying we would prefer to die over staying at home for a couple of months. That's astonishing. But this is indeed where we are. Let's listen to the clip of the restaurant owner who's opening his business early because he is concerned that his employees don't have the wages, and basically he's a business owner and he needs to make profits. Let's hear the clip.
And listen, I'm just one restaurant trying to get people back to work. And, I think I get a lot of people that are grateful for what I've done. And, again, it wasn't to be rebellious or anything. It was really because people don't have an out. These guys have to get a paycheck. Paychecks stop. There's a lot of nice programs out there with the, a stimulus check that helped, but for how long, and then unemployment. How long is that going to go for? I know they're doing like 6 weeks, I think $600, and that's going to stop.
Yeah, that's going to stop. My point is, for the people in Wisconsin, you're protesting the wrong thing. I understand that Donald Trump is working behind the scenes in order to get some of these people out to protest and everything else. But again, you are being manipulated and you are protesting the wrong thing. This gentleman at this particular restaurant basically made the point that his workers were struggling. Vox came out to report that Pew Research found that although 11 million people have filed first-time unemployment claims in March, the wide variety of methods states and territories use to administer jobless programs have resulted in wide disparities in who received their payments and how much those payments were worth. As a result, only 29% of jobless Americans received benefits in March, according to the Pew analysis, based on Labor Department statistics. The disbursement rate of the unemployment payments was found to vary widely, with some at 66% of unemployed Massachusetts residents receiving their benefits, compared to 7.6% of unemployed Florida residents. You heard that right. 7.6% of Florida, 66% of Massachusetts. The problem here is that many of these states underfund their unemployment benefits. So the moment that you need a situation where states need to disperse these funds in somewhat of a rapid fashion because people are in dire straits, your infrastructure is not there to do it. It just doesn't exist. We've allowed that particular edifice to fall apart, and now that we need that particular edifice, it is not there for us to get that money to the workers. My point to you is, even though I understand that people are in dire straits, I understand that people are constricted, I understand that people even have these kind of ideological biases where they think that staying in home for 2 months is effectively communism. It is not. You're being manipulated. The government of the United States, particularly the Republican Party, I would even argue the Democratic Party, are taking policies that make and consistently keep you vulnerable. That vulnerability forces you to find ways in order to get income. And I would wager to you that some of those people that are out there are making the same argument that that business owner just made. Yes, that business owner is a capitalist. Yes, that business owner wants to make profit. But do you think he's entirely wrong that some of his employees will come in and thank him for opening the business so they can finally get another paycheck? The catch here is those people are protesting the wrong thing. Basically, what you should be angry about is that your government, during the middle of a pandemic, does not make provisions to keep you whole. The entire point of the government, in one respect, is to provide for the general welfare. That's even written into the Constitution itself. What is providing for the general welfare? For you to go to work in a situation where you can infect a large number of people. And again, we are not affected equally. African Americans, people with health issues, the elderly, children, they tend to be affected much more. So all of these people who are out there, many of them, if any of them have the illness, odds are some of them do, since Wisconsin and the rates have been spiking in Wisconsin recently, they're going to pass it. And the catch here, and the sad part is, the people who they pass it to, the people who end up getting sick, may not have had anything to do with this protest. The issue here is not about whether you as an individual will get sick. The issue here is that the larger part of society has people that care about their life every bit as much as you care about your life. And asking you to stay in a house for 2 or 3 months is not the same thing as communism. It's utterly absurd. Your government gave you $1,200 in unemployment benefits that the overwhelming majority of the people weren't able to get their hands on. Your issue here is the failure of your government. The issue here is not that the government is being closed by the various state and localities. No, that's not your issue. If you were able to be at home with a percentage of your paycheck, let's say about 80% of your paycheck, like they're doing in some other countries, will you be out here protesting like that? I assume some would, But I would also assume that many of those people would not be. Meaning the issue here is the insecurity and the vulnerability by the fecklessness and weakness of the Democratic and the Republican Party to deal with an actual crisis. And you have a lot of other people who look at this stuff entirely through this lens of capitalism and socialism and communism, things that aren't real, in order to deal with things that are real, like things that pertain to life or pertain to life and limb. Bob, I watch this protest and sometimes I get angry at this stuff because I think to myself, God, you guys are so empathetic. By the same token, I know these people are also being manipulated. And I also know that, like a lot of other people, their needs are at stake. And so it's like, I need to take care of my kids. I need to take care of my family. I need to take care of my house note, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody is providing for this. I got to go back to work.
Yeah.
It's aggravating.
No, I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I guess with the frustration is then you get to this argument of where people are told the government doesn't work. And well, that's not exactly what's happening. This government doesn't work. This current two-party system doesn't work. Government isn't all bad. Government is a centralized way for us who live within a geographic bound to communicate and share resources for the betterment of all. And what Republicans always somehow manage to do is go in and break government and then say, look, see, we told you government doesn't work.
Put us
and
in
if
office,
anything,
by the way. It doesn't work. Put us in.
It doesn't work. Revote for us. We're the ones that can break it even more and completely tear it apart is kind of their argument, Jamal. And people rally around that because they say, you know what, you are right. The government doesn't work. And they never actually hold those people accountable for breaking it. And it seems much easier to kind of rile up the anger than it does maybe to build some of those divides and actually build a government. It's a lot harder to build a government that cares for people than one that just destroys and just only focuses on profit.
Well, if you spend, let's say, 50, 100 years, how many ever, screaming that capitalism is the greatest thing on the planet, screaming that these other countries, that we're the exceptional one, we're unique in somehow in the way that we operate in the world, well, you may get this weird scenario where you end up in a real crisis where common sense says, look, wait for 3 months. You're talking about something in the course of, 65 years of your life, you have to wait for 3 months. And they're like, that's communism. That's temporary communism. We're not going to stand for it. That's insane. But they're willing to accept this whole cloth, and I would argue because they don't know anything else. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's a conditioning of. I mean, I think of every James Bond movie where it's either communist Russia or sometimes Nazis and all the Indiana Jones movies. I mean, every movie, if we need a bad guy, it's Nazis and the Soviets. And so you pound into people's heads about how bad socialism and communism is from a very young age. You rile them against them. People need an enemy that they can have it scare them as the boogeyman that validates whatever opinion they care about, Jamal. And people continue to rush and fight against the boogeyman. And we'll talk a lot about the economic inequalities that are from that then. And that's always kind of the crazy thing to me is people continue to see this wealth accumulate amongst so few people, Jamaro, and they see the government as actively helping those people, these huge banks. At what point do people say, wait a second here, I'm not getting any of that money? Because that $1,200, obviously we've talked about the last few weeks, does not go very far. It's not reaching a lot of people. At some point, Jamaro, that reaches a stress point where people have had enough and said, wait, this isn't reaching me whatsoever. I mean, I'm just curious at what point do those stress points come? Is it another 2 months? Is it another 3 months? At what point do people actually start to, I guess, I don't know, say rebel or strike or bigger demonstrations, what that even looks like during COVID-19. But at some point, it's just going to continue to lead to greater stress on all parts of the political, social, and economic systems in the United States.
Well, here's the thing. The overwhelming majority of people want these to stay in, meaning they want the restrictions to stay in order. So you had like 70% in one of the latest polls that I've seen. So this is a small faction of the society that is pushing for this. I mean, what, you're talking about Wisconsin, you had like a few thousand people, I think like 2,000 people show up to the protests. But the issue here is kind of what we discussed before, where one person can infect a lot of people. Like, think for the moment, one of those people go to the convenience store. That person goes from the convenience store maybe to a grocery store. That person goes home and maybe have a relative that's at the house. Like,
well, how much is it people just wanting to like maintain hope and not be honest with how, I mean, now we're actually having White House officials saying social distancing will continue throughout the summer. Yeah. It's pretty obvious, as you said, one person can spread it to like hundreds of people. If there is no vaccination, there is no herd immunity, this is going to continue to spread. Are people just not wanting to face the fact that this is going to be a really horrible time the next 6 months at least, and it's just like, let's just keep ignoring it and pretend it's not going to happen? It's
two things, right? It's one, this kind of Republican dogma where they don't want to expend money on social services, And so now you have a situation where they kind of need this money on social services. And their response is, well, we have two options. We either need to get these people back to work as possible, fast as possible, so they can take care of themselves, or we need to do it. But they can't be both. Like, it has to be one or the other because people need to be made whole in some particular way. So their response is, let's create protests behind the scenes in order to try to create a groundswell, this kind of astroturf support. Maybe the public will latch on to the notion of these people being out there and get with the idea that we need to get back to work. I don't think it's a hope issue. I really don't think it's a hope issue. I think it's a base level ideological bias that these guys have had going from the time they were infants to the time of now. That's what
I think those people, I think just like, I think of my mom, who's just kind of like, this is a boring thing, or my wife, the same kind of thing, where they're just looking for the end. They're looking for the light at the end of the tunnel, where it's not about them making money. My mom's retired, and so right now she's relatively safe with security nets and retirement plans, but just wanting to go back outside. And so people have somehow had to convince themselves that this thing is almost over to help the time pass. Jamal, the other big story that I'm kind of interested in here, as you mentioned, Wisconsin at the top of the hour, Ohio will hold its mail-in election. Largely mail-in election is tomorrow. Today and tomorrow, the last days to postmark your mail-in ballot. So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, Republicans notorious for voter suppression and finding ways to suppress the vote, how they will target mail-in elections. These things aren't easy to do, Jamal. There are a lot of people, and this is not giving credit to what they're trying to do with voter check there. And the Republicans is knocking a lot of people off the rolls, but there are a lot of people that have passed away, who have moved away, who are still on the rolls. So there is like natural tidiness that needs to happen for the list. What the Republicans were doing were basically looking for anybody that had the same name. So a Jose Gonzalez or a Steve Brown, if they found matching names, they were just striking one of the names off the list. So they were going much beyond it. But Jamar, that initial point of, wait, we got to get these ballots to people, and you only can go and vote in person at the Board of Elections within your county. So there is a singular place that you can go to in person that will have heightened restrictions. The polls are closed otherwise. I'm just curious how the mail-in ballot process works.
How do we even know that everybody gets a ballot? This just seems so dicey to me. It's not that I hate the mail-in thing. I don't necessarily trust it on the fly like this. Maybe that's it. Like, what are the quality checks? How do you ensure that everybody who's supposed to get a ballot gets a ballot? This notion of maybe you send it to various areas where you know you have certain advantages as opposed to others. Like, I don't know the quality controls on it. And maybe if I did, I'd be a little bit more...
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, for me, it's like, well, at least more people have the option. A lot of people have just kind of given up because you made it too hard to stand. I mean, nobody's trying to stand in line for like hours on end. I'm somebody that does early voting, and for me, that's the best fix. Is you give people a week and a half to go when they have some time. You spread out the electorate over a week and a half at a few different locations, and that way you can have shorter times. But if you actually vote on election day here in Washington, D.C., you're looking at least an hour or two if you go to peak times. People just don't want to do that. So maybe in another way, though, you include more people by having the mail-in process. But again, we've seen people steal absentee ballots and have forged signatures. That took a congressional race an extra, I think, to 4 months extra there in Florida last cycle to figure that out. So there are those simple ways. And when you've never done these larger systems, a national vote by mail process, Jamal, then we have the post office under attack itself, where you're saying, wait a second, who's going to deliver all of these? These are like legitimate questions that you have to start keeping an eye on, because people will chip away at the apparatus in order to make sure they maintain power.
How weird is it that the public is okay with them doing this? Isn't that strange? Like, understand, look, there's this kind of weird, you would hope that the ideals of the American society will matter more. They don't. I mean, basically, these guys just want to win. And how they win by hook or by crook, it doesn't necessarily seem to matter all that much. And it doesn't even seem like they have huge opposition to the, interstate cross-check or the voter ID laws or any of this stuff. I agree with you, Bob.
Yeah, I mean, and then you're asking a populace that has engaged with democracy and gotten so little from their government. It's basically like you're asking people to step up and may or may not get punched in the face. And it's like they've been punched in the face 12 times in a row. And you're saying, just one more time. We got you. Just vote for come one more time to get punched in the face. Jamar, let's take a quick break there. You're listening to Political Misfits live in DC. We have a full hour ahead. And if that's not enough, we have a second hour after that until 2 p.m. Eastern time on Radio Sputnik. You're listening to Political Misfits live in DC. We're back after this.
Tune in every Monday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for our regular segment, Education for Liberation with Bill Ayers, where we take a look at the state of education across the country. What's happening in our schools, colleges, and universities, and what impact does it have on the world around us? Our resident expert is Bill Ayers, the legendary activist, educator, and author. Tune in to Loud and Clear this Monday and every Monday for Education for Liberation with Bill Ayers.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. We continue our first hour talking about the latest political unrest in Brazil. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has been heavily criticized for his handling of COVID-19, made matters much worse for himself by firing the head of Brazil's equivalent to the FBI, Mauricio Valeixo. In response to the firing, things got worse for Bolsonaro as Justice Minister Sergio Moro, a beloved figure on the Brazilian right, abruptly resigned over the firing. Moro was a central figure in the car wash corruption investigation and jailing of former President Lula da Silva ahead of the 2018 presidential election, and was a symbol for many on the right as a leader of a new movement in Brazil. However, Moro's resignation, the poor handling of COVID-19, and now new allegations against Bolsonaro, many are beginning to ask how long he'll be able to stay in power. To talk about more, we're joined by Arnold August, a Montreal-based writer, journalist, lecturer, and author of 3 books on Cuba, Latin America, and the U.S. He throws in Canada in there as well. He was recently on a speaking tour addressing the geopolitics of U.S., Venezuela, Cuba, Bolivia relations, and the role of Justin Trudeau until the tour was interrupted by the pandemic. That will continue, but in the meantime, we are happy to be joined here by Arnold August. Arnold, how are you doing today?
Doing very well. How about you? It's a pleasure to be with you.
Arnold, it's a pleasure to have you here on Political Misfits. If you have anything you want to say regarding Brazil, give us a call, 202-521-1320, 202-521-1320. Arnold, Bolsonaro has postponed the appointment of a new justice minister after numerous news reports suggested Bolsonaro loyalist Jorge Oliveira would be the favorite for the role. What was behind Moro leaving, and what does his departure mean for Bolsonaro's administration?
I think that one has to look at the current situation with regards to the resignation and other contradictions within the Bolsonaro camp in the context, to a large extent, of the upcoming 2022 elections. And as you know, we have our own experience in the United States and Canada and other capitalist countries when, the leader of a party loses credibility within that party. They try to, float someone else in order to replace the person whose credibility is rapidly being lost. And I think that this is what is happening with the issue of Moro. He is still will be if he runs for elections in 2022, will be the official right-wing candidate, if we may put it that way, in support of the United States and Brazil. So I think that perhaps it's a positioning that Moro is trying to work out to propel himself in a favorable position towards the upcoming elections in 2022.
Yeah, it seemed like a good move for him here, as Bolsonaro has obviously not responded well to the COVID-19 crisis. And it's in many ways, such as Donald Trump here as the right-wing president, and at least energizer of the right wing here, Donald Trump, has also really struggled. But there, Bolsonaro's government leaving him. This is a big move. Tell us a little bit more about Moro's involvement with the car wash investigation that landed Da Silva in jail, and if Moro, you think, can actually rise to prominence and is seen as more of a serious figure in comparison to Bolsonaro.
Of course, Moro was instrumental in having Lula tried and put in jail on behalf of Bolsonaro and the other people in that party. But of course, I think with these type of politicians, as you know, we have our own experience in capitalist countries in the North, that their political motivation is the main thing that is driving them. And in this case, even though he served Bolsonaro very well with regard to that car wash scandal and having Lula sent to prison with regards to something else. That his main goal, the main goal remains the same. He would like to be the new candidate to oppose Bolsonaro in 2022, but we have to add another dimension. We're talking about the 2022 elections and the chances of Bolsonaro. I think there's also another issue. The same individuals are speaking about the possibility of impeaching Bolsonaro. So this is an important thing. If he is impeached, then what will happen to the elections that are scheduled for 2022? Will they have to be held before? How this will evolve is perhaps it's too early to say. But I think in order to try to, we're all trying to make some sense of what is happening in Brazil. And I think that in order to give us a context, we have to say that the contradictions that takes place in a country such as Brazil, for example, within the ruling party itself, and on the one hand, between the state government and the local administrations, local state administrations, these contradictions existed before. But I think the COVID-19 crisis has put a focus on these already existing contradictions and making them more obvious. And I think this is what is happening now. They existed before, but it's more obvious now. And Moro is just trying to use the situation in order to propel himself to be the candidate for that same party in 2022.
Well, let me ask you about the state of the right party before we come back to the opposition party there, because you also have Bolsonaro's sons, several of whom have been under questionable ethics over the last year or two since Bolsonaro has been in office. But over the weekend, details of the president's children's actions began leaking out as federal prosecutors identified Carlos Bolsonaro as a key figure in a, quote, criminal fake news racket accused of threatening Brazilian authorities. The Brazilian newspaper Folha de Sao Paulo reports that another son, Eduardo, is also under investigation in the same case. And furthermore, on Saturday, The Intercept reported that a third Bolsonaro son, Flavio, already the subject of a federal probe, profited from illegal construction by militia groups using public money. Obviously not a great weekend for the Bolsonaro family, but this also seems like it's going to incredibly slow the momentum of the right wing there in Brazil.
It's going to slow the momentum of the right wing in Brazil?
Will it? Yes.
Yeah, of course it is slowing the momentum. And no one can deny, because for what we're talking about, the current situation, but actually the current situation began when Bolsonaro fired his own health minister. That was really something. The health minister was simply following some basic sense. That is, for self-isolation, people should not take specific measures not to be contaminated and not to contaminate others. And these guidelines were also supported by the local city and state administrations as well. But the contradiction is so sharp that Bolsonaro had to fire him, even though it was obvious that person, even in a very mild sort of way, was defending the right of the people there to live and not to become a victim of the crisis, of the virus, the COVID crisis. So I think it began at that time when he fired his own health minister, and I think it's just been going on and on and on since then. And I think that it's probably more likely than not that all these individuals within his own ruling party, within his own circle, will probably try to have him impeached way before the 2022 elections.
Let me ask you this. Hi, Arnold. This is Jamal speaking. How has Lula responded to getting out of prison? Also, has he created, I guess, a political force in that country in order to push back against the right wing, either Bolsonaro or Moro?
I think that's a good question. I would say the following, Jamal, and Pascal, they say it's a pleasure to be with you virtually on this show. actually, Lula actually was the major political force in Brazil at the time, and it is specifically because of that you had these trumped-up charges worked out against him in order to put him in jail and effectively remove him from challenging the presidency a couple of years ago. He was a political force while he was in prison. The fact that he stood up to the individuals and the government who imprisoned him, he showed obvious courage, which is something that I think instills confidence in the people at the grassroots, because they see on the one hand individuals such as Bolsonaro and all his other people in that same party, they are just driven by selfish interests, corruption, any way to serve their own economic, political interests. Well, Lula, obviously, in the time he was in prison, showed a principle, showed that for him the most important thing was not his own well-being, his own life, but the well-being and the future of the Brazilian people, especially the Brazilian working class, the poor sections of society. So when he came out of jail, Amaral, he was, you probably saw the scenes. He was welcomed as a hero, and rightly so. Yep. And he came out as a hero. And he is, I think that he and his party, Rejuvenated Workers' Party, are the main political opposition force, if we may use that term, to win the next elections. I think they're in a very good position.
Interesting. And one last question with Bolsonaro. How has, so in the UK, initially they went with the idea or the policy of herd immunity, basically let the weak die off. Trump, I would imagine, all things being equal, if he didn't think there was going to be a political consequence, he would probably push the same thing, considering he's working behind the scenes in addition to some of these other Republicans to get people back to their jobs, even in the middle of a pandemic, even with the United States being the epicenter of it. What did Brazil do? Meaning, what did Bolsonaro do while he was in power? Did he try to, mitigate the damage that was being done to the various people? Did he shut down the economy? Like, what was the response of the right-wing Brazilian government in this crisis?
Initial reaction was not too dissimilar compared to someone that we very know in Washington, D.C. He just dismissed, it's nothing, it's just sort of some kind of a flu, it'll go away. He pretty much completely dismissed it. And this made him, the target of a lot of criticism within Brazil and even internationally. And now, the basic thing with this COVID-19, the contradiction is that it's obviously an important crisis. People have to be protected. People have the right to live and to go through this whole situation coming out alive. On the other hand, you have the drive of the economic forces, whether it's in Brazil or United States. They do not want to shut down the economy. They want to keep the economy going so as not to lose their profits. And I think that this is what was driving Bolsonaro. He just whitewashed it. He pretended that it didn't exist. I mean, only a few days ago, that was several weeks ago, only a few days ago, there was sort of some kind of a controversial scandal where the Brazilian government completely underestimated the number of deaths that arose as a result of the virus. And people asked, the journalist asked, well, what is the situation? How many people have died? And he, in a very arrogant way, he said, well, I'm not an undertaker. I don't want to talk about the number of people who are dying. And he also said at one point, well, why shut down the economy if in any case, I'm quoting from him, if in any case, around 70% of the population will be infected anyways. So this is the arrogance of someone whose only concern, only interest is the well-being of the capitalists within Brazil, and that's what he's carrying out. He is trying everything to keep what they said, keep the economy going, even if it goes against the states and the local administration, and even, as we mentioned earlier, even against his own Minister of Health. So where will this lead Brazil? Pardon?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Arnold. I mean, it's more than I think. So much of the media here, it's always presented as like nail salons and restaurants and the feel-good places family go that they want to start the businesses back up. But Bolsonaro's pushing major businesses that are destroying the Amazon rainforest, destroying land of indigenous people. It's restarting and keeping economy open that is actively destructive, destroying people's lives as well as the environment.
Yes, that of course, this makes the whole thing exponentially worse because, as you mentioned, he was favoring all of these interests before the COVID-19 in terms of deforesting Brazil and allowing the capitalists there to do anything they want with the rainforest and destroying the environment there. And now this evolution, this trend that they've been developing and encouraging over the years it's become even more magnified during the course of the COVID-19 crisis, that despite the crisis, they want to go ahead and allow these companies to carry on as they were doing before the crisis. And this, of course, can lead to dire consequences. I mean, we're talking about the possibility of Lula winning the elections or whatever in 2022, but my concern is probably similar to yours. The main thing is what is going to happen to the millions of poor Brazilians who are caught in this trap by the Bolsonaro government of refusing to recognize the nature of that crisis and to take serious steps, even minor serious steps such as social distancing, as that would help the population. That I think is our main concern is what is going to happen to the millions of people, many of whom are very poor, or even basic health availability is not there. As you know, at one point there were hundreds and hundreds of Cuban doctors who were in Brazil helping to develop the health system in Brazil. But one of the first things Bolsonaro did after being elected was to return the Cuban doctors back to Cuba. And in Argentina was a similar thing. They were sent back by the previous government. Now they're being invited to come in again. So I think that the Bolsonaro government has no concern at all for the well-being of the people, and this is bound to reflect itself in the politics in the coming weeks and the coming months.
I'm curious. Lula has been let out, but is this case still going on? Meaning, is this case still being tried? I don't know the details in regards to what happened when he got out, and I don't remember the reporting on whether or not the case was still kind of proceeding in order to get kind of, I guess, the charges either expunged or for him to be out for good. What's the update on the case so far?
I think, I don't know, I'm in a similar situation as you. I don't know the exact juridical details of that, but as far as I know, he is out now, and there's no way that he can be put into prison once again. So as far as the political scene in Brazil is concerned, he is free to carry out his political activity. And I don't think that they will be able, especially in this situation where the government is already under fire for its corruption and the contradiction within its own camp, that any measure that can be taken to Brazil against Lula at this time, it would only make his popularity soar even more at a time when the Bolsonaro government and the people involved with him, their credibility is becoming worse and worse.
Yeah, I mean, for Mauro to leave the government is just a huge blow as somebody that was integral in the car wash investigation against Lula. I just can't imagine with him now leaving the administration potentially being impeached if COVID-19 leaves us sooner than later. He is under hot water, to say the least, and I don't think they're going to be able to put Lula back in jail without a mass uprising on their hands. We are unfortunately out of time there with Arnold August, a Montreal-based writer, journalist, and lecturer. Arnold, where can people find more of your work online?
Well, they can go. I have a website. It's very simple, www.arnoldaugust.com. And I also have a Facebook page, Arnold August, and as well as Twitter. Happy
Thank
to
you.
me and join
make sure you Yep. Make sure you tag us, include us, and pass the message along. That was Arnold August, author of many great books. I know I want to have you back on to talk about Cuba-U.S. relations, Obama, and beyond as we come full circle. And maybe we'll be back with some Obama light with Joe Biden, what that means. Plenty to talk about in Latin America in the future. But for now, we need to take a minute break before coming back with more news, politics, and culture. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, live in D.C. We're back after this.
This is Dominic Carter, a political reporter in New York for Verizon Fios TV News.
This is Dr. Bill Honigman of Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org.
Hey, everybody, my name is Tim Black of The Tim Black Show.
This is Tom Luongo of Gold Coast and Guns. Hello, this is Benny Johnson.
Hi, this is Juanita Broderick, author of You'd Better Put Some Ice on That.
This is Jamal Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox.
Hey, this is Raheem from D.C.
This is Rachel Blevins, a correspondent with RT America, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
When I'm waking up in the morning and I'm looking for what's on the queue for the day, I tune to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
The wokest radio show for your wokest AM.
These guys are the best in the business and experts when it comes to policy.
They're bringing you the top headlines with an angle that you won't see in the mainstream media.
Fault Lines is the greatest show on the radio. I enjoy immensely talking with Lee and Garland. They always treat me from either side with due respect, and it's a wonderful conversation.
The best morning news show in America. Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Lee and Garland speak truth to power from the depths of the swamp itself, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. You can give us a call at 202-521-1320 if you have anything to say on the topics that we've covered or whatever else is on your mind. Just be sure to keep it PG. So, Bob, I have a few stories that I want to cover that caught my attention either today or this weekend. So let's start off with Assange. Now, this occurred this morning. Assange's case was adjourned in February until May 18th for further 3 weeks of arguments in Britain. In the meantime, or during this time, Britain was rocked by the COVID-19 virus, leading to national restrictions intended to curb the spread of the pandemic. This has created difficulties in holding the usual court proceedings. In a hearing held by conference call, Judge Vanessa Barrister, I apologize for the pronunciation at the very end.
Don't apologize to these people, Jamal.
Don't apologize. Screw it. Yeah, that's right.
What they're doing.
Judge Vanessa Barrister, I'm going with it. Remote attendance by the parties in this case would not be appropriate. Mr. Assange and the lawyers on both sides would need to be physically present in the courtroom. That sounds like common sense to me if you want to represent your client. The judge adjourned the case until May 4th, when a new date will be added, making reference to the Woolwich Crown Court, which has availability in November. Both sides agreed to the delay, meaning most likely this case is going to be postponed into November to deal with the coronavirus. Bob, has the press realized that if the United States government is successful in this, they are also fair game? Like, they seem to be completely oblivious to that point, that if they can get Assange for espionage laws, then all of them, their press freedoms have been eroded that much more.
Yeah, in some ways, yes. In some ways, no, because they're at their Hamptons parties with the people that threw Assange in jail. And so they say, look, we're fine because our buddies are the one that actually have the power and we are working in cahoots. So they're as much complicit and tied to us. If they ever want to come at us, we're just going to take them down with us. So, yeah, I think Julian Assange was doing something so unique in the media landscape and was able to get such notoriety and attention because he did it so well and to such scale that everybody else felt threatened by him. And so the CNNs, NBC, CBSs of the world have huge incentive to silence and quiet him because other people will demand that journalism is more like Assange. And so, yeah, in part, I think they should be conscious of it. But in another part, the media wants to kill Assange as much as the U.S. government does. In addition, I just want to mention, I mean, the fact that the Michael Cohens of the world and wealthy white people are able to get out of jail right now, they're walking it, and just seeing it at a very hyper local level in a case I've worked with for several years here in Florida, because the person who committed the crime is able to afford the alleged crime, is able to afford bail, he just stays at home. But if you're poor and you're a poor person of color or a white person and you can't afford bail, you're in jail right now, even though you're presumably innocent.
The majority of people are in jail for that, by the way. Like, the majority of people haven't been convicted.
Exactly. And so if you're wealthy right now, you're at home. If you're poor, you're stuck in jail, which nobody of these people were not sentenced to die by virus in a cage. That was not the agreement when they were put there. And now it's much different. And so our justice system also needs to be checked and understand that it's not punishing people to what it's currently punishing them to.
That's right. I mean, you look, the moment other countries around the world are letting some of their people out of prisons for obvious reasons. I mean, prison is a perfect scenario for that virus to spread. And we've seen ourselves where all of these inmates ended up getting sick. I think it was in Georgia or some of these other states. We have 5% of the world's population, with 25% of the world's population in our prison. I mean, that is more than China. China is like 3 times our population. That was more than the Soviet Union. And again, we're talking about different time periods, but you get my point. That is an astonishing number of people to put in cages. And oftentimes it's for like small stuff. I mean, you have debtors' prisons where people can't pay a fine and then the person put them in jail. And it's like, well, how are they going to pay the fine if they're in jail? Like, the stuff that we do in this country is astonishing. It's almost like warehousing the poor.
And we're learning more about these with the antibody test too. And we talked about it in LA County in New York last week, but they have now tested 4 U.S. state prison systems. They found nearly 3,300 inmates tested positive for the coronavirus, with 96% without symptoms. And so again, the number is going to reach 1 million of those who have confirmed tested positive for COVID-19, Jamal. But that number is going to be eventually, I got to say, the tens of millions. I mean, I don't know how else, is anything else around it with these antibody tests coming out showing that the huge spike in number of people that are asymptomatic.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I mean, it just seemed that you care about any level of health and humanity that you wouldn't keep people in prison for ridiculous reasons. And the fact, if you could let those people out now, then you could have let them out the first time around. Meaning, like, if you could come up with a justification of saying, okay, we need to let these people out of prison because of the virus, well, that means that they didn't need to be in prison in the first place. You know what I mean? Like, it's good.
Yeah, and it's just a huge place for Joe Biden as we talk about how to start winning people on the left. Basically, call for everyone with any marijuana conviction to be released immediately. Those are non-violent drug offenders who are charged with a drug that will be legal at some point in the near future at a federal level, if not half the states already are legal. But yet Joe Biden is against marijuana. And so, again, he can't even speak out on some basic ways to contrast himself with Donald Trump. And then he ends up being the same guy as Donald Trump, but just not as entertaining.
You know, I would love for Donald Trump to come out and say, you know what, weed is going to be legal when I get elected again, and take a bong hit on the White House lawn. That'd be awesome. But let me get back into the election for the moment. So let's jump back into U.S. elections. Bernie Sanders and his supporters are on the warpath, kind of, again, to keep him on the ballot in New York. Now, what am I talking about? So Sanders formally suspended his campaign at the beginning of this month, after the twin pair between coronavirus and weeks of painful losses effectively ate his campaign and brought his campaign to a halt. 5 days after he suspended his campaign, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo signed a budget bill with an obscure provision allowing the New York Board of Elections to remove candidates from the ballot that had withdrawn from the presidential primary, meaning Sanders himself. Now, despite suspending his campaign, Sanders has expressed an interest in wanting to accumulate enough convention delegates to receive 25% of the seats on the key committees at the convention. This includes the rules and bylaw, the party platform, and the convention credentials. This would allow his backers to submit a minority report to the convention floor for a vote on matters that pertain to him and his supporters. For example, superdelegates. It should be noted that it's rather unusual for a presidential candidate to compete for delegates after formally suspending their campaign. But Joe Biden team, who is open to this, wants to be amenable to Sanders, especially if he can give basically nothing in order to get the support of a few wayward lefties. Basically a token gesture. On Sunday, Sanders' lawyer Malcolm Seymour intervened, writing to the board that the retroactive application of the change in the election law will severely impact Senator Sanders' core substantive rights. Because of the severity of this potential deprivation, the presumption against retroactive application must operate with maximum force. I love these legal terms. Seymour further noted that the new law merely states that the Board of Elections may, rather than must, decide to remove the ballot candidates who have ended their campaigns for the nomination. So let me get this straight. After running a lackluster campaign, where his supporters got viciously attacked, where he got viciously attacked, where there was clear impropriety in the way the election was being held, especially in Iowa and, of course, back in 2016, and where Sanders could not bring himself to use the urgency given by the rhetoric that he's using, this existential rhetoric. All of these people are living on the streets. All of these people are without health care. All of these people are burdened with that, but could not bring that substantial rhetoric to get him to go after the avatar of everything that he rails against, Joe Biden. I have a brutal question, Bob. Should I care about this, and should it matter? And what I'm getting at is it's token. It's like he had the opportunity to run a campaign that wasn't a token campaign. He ends up running a token campaign.
Oh, yeah. You don't need to explain it to me. All right? It was a hard no from the beginning of that story, Jamal. You gotta let him go. Because you can't. A movement means nothing to the Democratic Party. What is 25% of some Sanders delegates on these rules committee going to mean to the Democratic Party?
It's
nothing. Yeah, but it's something. It's symbolic. It looks good. The Democratic Party is a type of party that will spit in your face in the middle of a global pandemic, Jamal. These people do not care about you, and they're going to continue to use Bernie Sanders every way they can. I mean, it's just even the language that comes out of the Democratic Party. Yeah, we love Bernie Sanders and those progressives. And it's like, wait, you guys call yourselves progressives all the time. Joe Biden, I thought you were the most progressive person all the time. Bernie Sanders was pushing some type of democratic socialism or socialism. Why not say, we as the progressive that we just call ourselves progressives now want to listen to you farther to the left, such as you socialists or democratic socialists. We hear you. But instead, they're already whitewashing what the Bernie Sanders movement was. And I don't know if Bernie Sanders is just playing into it, if he's tired. He did have a heart attack that was amazing that he even ran after that in the first place. Let's keep that in mind, that he might have just said, I got to throw in the towel. People want to vote for me. I want to make sure people feel like they were heard, they were seen. I mean, because it does hurt to have Sanders off the ballot there in New York. A lot of people worked really, really hard, and we're already going to see a huge of a lot of younger voters in the United States, and that's incredibly worrying. They didn't turn out to vote for Sanders. They were disillusioned by Obama, and younger people just aren't engaged. And now you're telling them, hey, you just worked for a year or two to get this guy back up and going, and you're not even going to symbolically get a cast a vote for him. In that sense, that does matter for the larger kind of political movement. But you, Jamal, you take a rest, my guy.
I got to be honest. I don't care about this one. I mean, look, Sanders, he might be tired. I mean, he bolted from the grave and did a great job after having a heart attack. So fair enough. But if I'm looking at this as ideological, where you're trying to get concessions or you're trying to get something out of it, I think Sanders' base operating process is, I don't want to be Ralph Nader. Sanders has said this years ago. I don't want to be Ralph Nader. I don't want to be Ralph Nader, which means you don't have the capacity to wage an ideological war in the way that you would need to wage it in order to win this race. Like, you can't have these restraints of like, okay, I can't go after Joe Biden. I can't say that Clinton, Gore, and Kerry lost and Joe Biden is just as unelectable as they are. I can't say that. That makes me feel weird. Like, dude, you have to say that. Are you trying to win or not? Like, it's like, if you're going to tell me, I think my reasoning for feeling some kind of way about this is because if you're going to tell me that you have all of these big existential issues, and I agree with you. And to me, the sense of urgency that's brought by that requires me to do everything that's in my power to try to win that race. And he doesn't.
But wasn't his calculation to say, look, if I attack Biden like you wanted him to, Jamal, I'll lose the war. I won't win against Trump because the Democratic establishment will just throw in the towel against me. So the best Sanders could do was basically not go hard at Biden, somehow flip the coin that he wins, that Iowa goes a little bit differently, and those first few states like South Carolina don't end up being his Achilles heel. Wasn't he saying, look, I can't go that hard at the guy if I want to win long term, so sure, I might lose now, but there's no way I was going to win in the future with this strategy?
I don't buy that. And the reason why I don't, well, let me explain why. The reason why I don't particularly buy that, yes, I agree with you that the Clintonites and those people would never vote for Sanders. But, the Democratic Party was willing to lose to Trump in order to get even the potential to take power without it being Sanders. I would imagine that Sanders has to take the same perspective, right? I mean, you can't run a race where you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to lose in the end. You have to pursue your case. And in pursuing your case, also one other point, Biden only has like 27% popularity, which means that if Biden only has that much popularity, nobody is loving Joe Biden. The African-American community doesn't love Joe Biden. The Democratic Party doesn't love Joe Biden. They just look at him as being electable. So I think he's fair game to go after. I don't necessarily think Sanders loses support from that outside of people who would have never supported him in the first place.
Yeah, no, a lot of questions there. Let's turn to a caller here on Political Misfits. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. We're talking about domestic politics now here at the end of the first hour. We'll start there. So if you have anything to say about the continued strikes in the United States, Nancy Pelosi's failed attempts to actually be a wall there in Congress against Donald Trump and the GOP senators that are ramming through these horrible bills, give us a call, 202-521-1320. We do have a caller on the line. Ben, are you there with us?
Oh?
Hey,
Yes.
Ben, you're on Political Misfits.
Hey, one, I just want to give a shout out to Jamal, because that interview you did with Nick, even though it really wasn't the safest interview, you guys were kind of close to each other, it was very good. I think you deserve some kudos for that.
Thanks, man.
My understanding for New York is that he has actually been removed. He's not going to be on it. So, not sure if. I mean, I know like a lot of people will come down like Kyle Kalinske and stuff like that. It looks like he doesn't even have to make a decision at this point, because it's like, well, it's not even on the ballot, then what you do? I think he's actually been removed. So,
well, wait, hold on. Ben, thanks for the call. I'm going to give you some breaking news here that's opened up over the course of the show here. New York Board of Elections cancels Democratic presidential primary. The story here from the New York Times, the State Board of Elections scrapped the state's June 23rd Democratic nominating contest, citing the risk of spreading coronavirus in a move opposed by supporters of Bernie Sanders. So they one-upped it, Jamal. Why even hold the thing at all?
Well, that's what they were going to do if they decided to not have Sanders on the ballot.
Yep.
So that just basically means they decided to kick him off the ballot, at which point they're like, yeah, no need to have this election now. Joe Biden is our guy. So, like I said, I didn't have all that much feelings about this. I mean, Sanders lost me in the sense of not prosecuting his case. And so it's like, now you're doing a token gesture and I'm supposed to get my feelings worked up on a token gesture? Yes. No, not so much. Like,
yeah,
if you want to get my feelings revved up, do so when you're trying to win, not with this nonsense.
Yeah, and it costs money too. And if we're in a time of imagined austerity, which we're going to be told out there that everything has to be cut, costs have to be cut, and you're basically saying we need to run a large-scale mail-in ballot process here with millions of people voting, that's going to cost money. That's going to put more non-essential things out there. Well, I guess voting is essential, but not for just a singular person or in a race that's already been conceded tomorrow. So, yeah, I think I'm with you here. It makes sense that they just canceled it altogether, but not a really strong primary there for the Democratic Party. Not a smooth process, to say the least.
Wait till he gets into the general. Oh, God. I mean, Trump is going to hit him with the rape charge. He's going to hit him with the bankruptcy, Hunter Biden, all the things that Sanders wouldn't bring up, Trump will. And which means that Biden was never inoculated from that stuff in the typical way you would be inoculated in a primary. Sanders, believing that he was doing the best, ends up not so much.
Yeah, I mean, what a great point to make there, Jamal. I mean, obviously we had covered the impeachment hearing. I still just laugh at what a world that was. It feels so distant ago. But looking into Ukraine, if Joe Biden is in office day one, the Republican Party, if they have control of the Senate, will impeach Joe Biden. And the fact that he didn't just get this out of the way early on and dive deep into the allegations, tackle them head on, have Sanders call him out and have a response to it. Because now you're basically waiting for Donald Trump to do it right closer to the election. People have short-term memories. Why not get it out of the way 6-7 months beforehand and hope people forget like they seemingly do here in the United States? But Jamal, with that, we are at the end of our first hour. We look forward to a second hour. We'll be talking about nationwide rent strikes, new presidential polling numbers from Texas, and we will have our weekly Miss the Press segment. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in D.C. We're back after this.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here, kind of, sort of, with Jamarl Thomas. We continue to bring you live programming here on Radio Sputnik. There is a full day of programming ahead of us still, so stay tuned on Radio Sputnik. We're here through the 2 o'clock hour, followed by one of my favorites by any means necessary with Sean Blackman and Jacqueline Lukeman from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. After that, you got Loud and Clear with Brian Becker and John Kiriakou. We round that out with Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. Give us a call. Let us know what's on your mind today, 202-521-1320. As always, follow us on the Progressive Soapbox. Make sure you check out that YouTube channel. You can like us there and share that link with your friends. You can still see Jamarl's beautiful face despite us not being in the studio. And if you don't have a chance to listen to us live daily, you can check us out on all the great podcast platforms out there, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, iTunes, wherever you may listen. Look for the Political Misfits there. Let's get into the news, politics, and culture of the hour. Lots to cover, including new presidential polls from Texas, what Joe Biden has to say about police accountability, and later the chaos COVID-19 is causing in America's food supply chains. First, we talk about national cancel the rent demonstrations that took place in over 40 U.S. cities over the weekend. Protesters in large car caravans came out in mass to highlight the vast economic inequality in the U.S. and demanded that if wages and benefits were not being paid to small businesses and individuals, those people should not be required to pay rent. Here to talk about that and much more is Brianna Griffith, the producer and host of the radio show People's Republic. Brianna, welcome back to Political Misfits.
Thanks. Always glad to be on. I love this show.
Thanks for being back with us. The protests for me, Brianna, seem to highlight once again that in times of crisis, the rich and greedy will look to steal and hoard wealth and resources from the masses of people, especially poor people. Since the start of the pandemic in the United States, the federal government has pumped at least $5 trillion into the big banks and the largest corporations. Only $249 billion was allocated for unemployment funding. This massive gift to the banks, the 1% at the top compared to the 160 million U.S. workers, is 20 times the amount allotted for the unemployed. Brianna, what were the demonstrations like this weekend, and what was the mood of those protesting?
The demonstrations, I do want to kind of make clear with regard to like these cancel the rent protests is that these in many ways are, kind of polar opposite of these kind of like really reactionary, like the Trump protests where everyone's basically risking getting COVID and spreading COVID. So we made sure these were socially distant. We made sure that we were following kind of the health guidelines and keeping everybody safe. I would say the mood was really strong. I feel like people have been uncertain as to kind of what to do, how they're going to solve this problem, because there's so many people unemployed right now. There's no money flowing. There's money flowing to some people, but vast majority of people, these checks are obviously not going to cut it. And so from the protest I went to in San Antonio, we had some people from Austin go down to San Antonio. There was also one in Dallas, all across the country, but in Texas I know of. And the mood was, I would say, pretty positive, pretty strong, that we're actually doing something, that it's a meaningful response to people's fears and people's frustrations and people's justified anger at the way this has been handled right from the start.
Yeah, and for me, this point of contention around mortgage payments and rents is a real stress point for the capitalist system. And I'll be curious to kind of hear what you think about the stress and pressures being put on people, because eventually people simply will not have money to pay their landlords. Eventually people in small businesses will not be able to pay the developers that own the large building. And at some point, they're just simply not going to have the money that the developers are demanding. And it's quite sickening because the federal government is giving those developers and mortgage companies and big banks the money to basically handle the losses from people, Brianna, but yet they're still demanding people pay whatever they have or take out additional loans. It seems like we're going to continue for the near future, at least months on end, of this stress. I mean, May 1st, a big international day for labor, comes at a time when people are yet again expected to pay rent while we have millions upon millions of Americans unemployed.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this accumulation of wealth you're talking about, that tendency of the rich to grow richer and the poor to grow poorer. I mean, that's the thing that's been a constant. For the entirety of capitalism, that's the thing that really has rung true, has remained true at every stage of capitalist development. And so, this is sort of this latest iteration. This, this is exacerbated in many ways. I think even more so than a main recession. I think, at the other hand, it's also kind of waking people up, but to kind of how these work. I was looking up kind of the info on just how, people knew real estate was expensive, but I was looking up some of the data on that, and it's really kind of astounding that basically we're kind of at this level as far as pieces of real estate for this that we were in 2008. In the late 2000s there. And so this kind of always promise that you can own your own home is really it's illusory for a very, very long time. Shouldn't be. It doesn't have to be. There are more empty homes than there are homeless people by a very large margin. There's more food than there is hungry people, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like the ability of the government to, I guess, with regards to the rent now, could step in and fix this if they were actually trying to do so. If they advocated the trillions of dollars to the people the way they very easily could have, if they had reversed the kind of equation, they could have. But right now, there's no pressure on them to do so.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're totally right. And that's so much, as you mentioned, 2008, Jamarl, is where a lot of the inequalities and disaster capitalism is taking place right now is from the fallout from the 2008 recession. And we talk a lot about the racial and ethnic health inequalities being shown by COVID-19. We're also seeing that in the economy the same way we saw in 2008, that people that are at the lowest margins are not being bailed out. 71% of people have not received their $1,200 check.
That's right.
I think it was being reported that no one in Puerto Rico, and yet at the same time, you have middle class and upper class white households continuing to increase how much wealth they have. The upper white households in 2017 had a median wealth of $810,000. That's 10% more prior to the recession in 2007, Jamarl. So people are still getting richer. As much as we hear about all of the mass chaos and poverty, there's people still getting wealthier and wealthier through these depressions, Great Depressions, economic shocks.
Yeah, it's the people at the bottom that takes the blunt end of those particular shocks. Wow, I didn't realize that number was that high, 800,000. That's amazing. Brianna, a question for you. So what's the excuse of the Democratic Party? Now, let me explain what I mean by this. The Republican Party is ideologically bent. Now, I would make the argument that both of these parties are relatively the same with a modicum of, caveat of difference between the two, but it's a least worst difference, not necessarily anything beyond marginal. But what is their excuse here? The Republican Party has been running the ball in regards to the $1,200. The Republican Party has been running the ball with regards to these stimulus bills. The Democratic Party has just acquiesced to all of this. It's not like Nancy Pelosi has the House of Representatives and they can put out their own policies. Actually, it's exactly like that. Meaning, instead of her fighting on these various policies of saying, this is what we want, this is our vision in the middle of this particular crisis, these are the things that we stand for, it's just acquiescing to Republican demands. What is their excuse and why are they behaving in this ineffective, weakened way? And one last question on that. You made the point about holding them accountable. How do you hold a party like that accountable?
I don't even know what their excuses. They've been just completely absent from this conversation. They've just been really gone. I don't even think they're trying to put up much in the way of excuses. They'll sit there and complain about what's being passed. I think the only person I think so far who's really put forward a bill that actually proposes a canceling the rent would be Ilhan Omar. I don't know too much about it, but she put something forward. obviously, she doesn't really speak for kind of the Democratic Party establishment. And other than that, I mean,
Well, to be fair, Maxine Waters put forward a plan that was basically Sanders' plan. Rashid Tlaib was talking about the $2 trillion coin, which I am always fascinated by, because the president could direct the Mint to essentially create a coin for $2 trillion and just sit it there and let the public pull off of that coin. Like, there are all sorts of things that they could do. They just don't. I guess that's the kind of point that I'm making here. I guess my thing is, why not? Like, why don't they do that? And what is the response from the standpoint of the public to hold them accountable?
Reason, I mean, it just seems like capitalism, and the bill you're talking about from Ilhan Omar, the cancel all rents and mortgages about 10 days ago, had co-sponsors with AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Cornelia Jayapal, Mark Pocan, kind of your lineup. And for me, it just constantly goes back to Nancy Pelosi saying, we're capitalists. They're capitalists. There's nothing to offer the people and the masses of redistribution of wealth in a capitalist system. And Nancy Pelosi's made it very clear, except for the small gang, which is what, maybe 5 or 6 or 3 or 4, whatever Pelosi said in dismissive ways, Brianna, she's made it clear we're capitalists. And within a capitalist framework, there is nothing the Democratic Party is going to be able to do to actually help people cancel rents. They rely on the mortgages industry. They rely on the banking industry. They rely on the financial service and trade industry. The Democratic Party relies on all of those people being extremely wealthy, because then they fund their campaigns to basically stay in power and office. There is nowhere to go for the Democratic Party. They're simply not designed to do what I think Jamal is asking for.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with all of that. I mean, the Democratic Party, they in literally the same corporate donors as the Republican Party. They sort of will put forward minor differences in messaging here and there, but it's same people, it's the same donors, it's the same ideology. It's just sort of a different branding of that. And if we want things, to change, we need that sort of outside pressure. We need that sort of outside kind of mass movement, and real sort of, I'd say, like, leadership, to be able to, like, move this conversation forward, to be able to, like, have the kind of muscle to make these demands, because, like, we, over and over again, we can't really trust the Democratic Party to operate in good faith. Like, they do this, usually they don't even bother giving the ideological concession anymore. They won't even say what they're going to do. It's like, if you want to really, like, push, you want to get those changes made, if you want to transform society in any sort of way, I mean, ultimately you need to change that balance of sort of like the working class power, the ruling class power. Right now, the U.S. government, the capitalist government, really does not fear their working class at all. Not even in the same way that, like, a lot of the European governments, where the unions are stronger. Like, I'd say right now, if you really want to make those changes, really want to see this carry through, if you want to make sure that there's an actual kind of progressive, I mean, the two best investments you can make in your own future and your community's future, to join a union and to join a socialist party.
Yeah, that seems like one plan to hold Democrats accountable. Join other parties and organizations. We have a caller on the line. Scott, are you on the line? Scott.
Yes.
Scott, what's on your mind? Thanks for calling in.
Well, I'd like to correct on a things about why Democrats continue to lose.
Go for it.
So, Jamal will keep saying that Hillary Clinton lost, Al Gore lost, John Kerry lost. Well, John Kerry, he tried to out-Republican the Republican in the room. No one wanted George Bush as president in 2004. That's why they went to go vote for John Kerry. But John Kerry didn't want to run an actual campaign. Now, as far as Al Gore did not lose because he didn't run a good campaign. He ran a terrible campaign. He lost because the Supreme Court stopped the recount in Florida and gave the presidency to George Bush, effectively making this country a monarchy. He made George Bush president via the Supreme Court. Hillary Clinton lost because she ran a shitty campaign against Donald Trump. I think Hillary Clinton should have dropped out.
We need to drop that there. We can't use that language. We did ask for PG today. It was a horrible campaign. I agree with you, but we'll have to drop the word you used there. But no, Scott, I get your point. It seems like, Brianna, so often these Democrats, go to the right. And that's my frustration. I'm kind of curious your own personal experience, because we didn't have a chance to talk to you since Bernie Sanders dropped out. And it just sounds so painful to say. I'm so sorry, Jamal. Since Bernie Sanders dropped out to endorse Joe Biden. But for many people like yourself who are part of a socialist political party, a non-democratic party, you said, look, I'm going to one more time see if the Democratic Party can't do something here with Bernie Sanders. But Bernie Sanders, for you, and if I can speak for you, and you can correct me if I was wrong, was the compromise candidate within the Democratic Party. You weren't saying, "Lo, go be Bernie Sanders and compromise with Joe Biden and find kind of a center-right place." You were saying, no, Bernie Sanders will set the middle, and then the Joe Bidens to the right and other people to the left can then battle it out and find some place around Bernie Sanders. But Bernie Sanders was supposed to be the goalpost for the compromise, and now that goalpost has been moved way to the right. So I can't imagine people like yourself and other socialist organizations or people that may have been willing to support Sanders. There's reasons you're checking out right now. It's not because you want Donald Trump to be elected, but it's because simply Joe Biden and the Democratic Party do not represent your values or the policies you want to see enacted.
Well, of course not. I've been a Green Party member since 2016 when they flagrantly stole the nomination from Sanders. I mean, the Democratic Party had been right-wing since 1992 when Bill Clinton dragged the party to the right. I mean, it was Democrats who destroyed welfare. It was Democrats who passed the 1994 crime bill with Republican support. It was Democrats who passed NAFTA. So the Democrats have been a right-wing party for well over almost 25 years, 30 years going on. I think that Sanders, he didn't really run a campaign. He didn't call out attacks by Warren, by Kamala Harris, by Joe Biden. He wasn't really ready to run a true campaign. And he didn't really support and fight for his voters. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Brandon, I'm curious, what do you think about what I had mentioned?
I mean, I don't think for us it was really so much like we knew kind of Bernie Sanders, what he was, or what his class character of him and his kind of coalitions and whatnot. Like we understood like where he was going to draw the line. We understood that. I mean, in many ways, at the end of the day, he was going to wind up kind of capitulating and saying, "Vote Democrat." He made that very clear. It's not. It's not something that was any great mystery to anybody. But for us, it was very much sort of the issues he was raising, more so than Sanders himself. It was the contradictions within our society that was exposing. We thought that was kind of a step forward. I think that really is like the crucial element there is like, how do you bring people's attention to like these massive kind of contradictions between what the U.S. government and what the ruling class is going on and what's actually going on. I absolutely agree. Like it's very on the point of Democratic Party like backing to the right. I absolutely agree with that. That it's going to be impossible to drag Joe Biden to the left. You can maybe get him to make some minor, again, ideological concession. He says one thing, but at the end of the day, he's going to side with the same corporate donors. He's always described as a moderate. He's not a moderate. Even within the Democratic Party, he's right-wing. He's associations with like Democrats and whatnot, the old school segregationist Democrats. I mean, he's not going to be dragged anywhere. And the fact that the Democratic Party lined up behind him just volumes out they're not willing to really go anywhere. And in many ways, like the ads he's put out, we basically have two right-wing presidential candidates trying to out-right-wing the other and say, I'm the real, quote unquote, I'm the real American. Other guys, this communist-loving, foreigner-loving, like with regards to China and whatnot. They're both trying to be more anti-China, anti-communist, anti-socialist than the other one. And this idea that like Biden's marginally better or that he would be marginally better Supreme Court justice or whatnot, I just don't.
Yeah, I don't buy that either. I mean, look, if he may take a marginally better Supreme Court, but my reasoning for not backing Biden is a little bit slightly different. I look at it as this kind of what you brought up. If you want to get anything accomplished, meaning if you want to get anything done, if you want to use the Democratic Party for anything, either burn it down or turn it into something else. There's no other ways around it because the way it is now, it is just weak and feckless. I mean, look at what they're doing in Washington right now. They're in the middle of a crisis, a pandemic, and Nancy Pelosi has been absolutely inefficient and just exorbitantly weak and coming up with any level of opposition to Trump. What should they do? So what should people do here? I agree with you, people should join another party. And just to make a point to Scott, regardless of the reasons that those Democrats lost, they still lost. Regardless of the reason that Al Gore lost, regardless of the reason that Kerry lost, regardless of the reason that Hillary Clinton lost, they all lost. They took specific policies that for the most part the public was against, and they lost. The reasoning doesn't matter. Brianna, what should people do here? Clearly, I don't think people should vote for Joe Biden. But I guess I'm trying to get to something that's a little bit more different in the sense of accountability. You said that there was no way to pull Joe Biden over to the left in regards to our political space. Now, is that because Joe Biden has no real belief that lefties that he has a belief that over the last 40 years, lefties has always backed the Democratic Party, so they will do the exact same this year so they don't have to give anything? Meaning, if Joe Biden believed that he was going to lose this race, flesh to bone, would he make concessions? Or is this just one of those things where they would rather lose than make concessions?
I mean, it seems he's already, and so the Democratic Party is already prepared for the very likely possibility that he loses. I mean, he's the candidate because, like we were saying all along, like the Democratic Party was not really running their own primaries to find the best person to stop Trump. They're running their own primaries to find the best person to stop Sanders. They coalesced around Biden just out of sheer name recognition, as well as some of the kind of coalition strength in South Carolina and whatnot. Like there are various reasons they coalesced around Biden. Ultimately, like they were running to stop Sanders, accomplish their mission, and so now they don't feel accountable to anybody at all. They're fine with just kind of losing this, letting Trump, get reelected if that's the case, because again they seem to be doing just fine. They're fine with being this like kind of weak and ineffectual opposition.
Yeah, I wanted to also just stay on this topic, Brianna, and get some of your thoughts around the task force set up by Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. For me, it was frustrating because many in my world of misfits saw Sanders as the compromise candidate. And now all of a sudden we see Bernie Sanders, who's not overly vocal, or at least vocal enough for a lot of folks when it came to addressing the Black Lives Matter movement or the movement for Black lives. Him and Joe Biden, the architect of the 1994 crime bill, the two of them are setting up a criminal justice task force, which is just absolutely ludicrous that Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are somehow going to be the two leading voices on Democrats reassessing and reforming criminal justice, when the Democratic Party, and this is again goes to the point of how the GOP and the Dems are one party, they're both crime and order types of parties. They're both lock, stock, and barrel when it comes to policing in America. There is no reforming a criminal justice system that is brutal and is racist, such as the one here. And I've talked about this on By Any Means Necessary when I used to work there for years on end. The mass amount of shootings by police, the high-profile ones that we're seeing, are in Democratic cities. Freddie Gray, Baltimore, Democrats. Chicago, Democrats. Washington, D.C., Democrats. Los Angeles, Democrats. Austin, where you are, Brianna, Democrat Austin Mayor Steve Adler, and they have 4 days ago another police shooting. These police shootings are not being mentioned. They're not being talked about, and I certainly don't think Bernie Sanders is going to wake up Joe Biden to the need to have some police accountability in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, and the other part of this is what exactly is a task force for? What exactly does the task force do? A lot of times we know what the tasks are that we need to do, and the tasks are we need to decriminalize marijuana. We need to get the people who have been in jails and prisons for so long, out of these prisons for these minor drug offenses and all of this stuff. It's very clear, how the prison industrial complex is built. It's very clear the tasks need to be set up in order to, in order to dismantle that. It's not some great mystery where we need to constantly tank things, do more studies. That's actually one of the problems, if you don't mind me segueing a little bit into the Austin police shooting that just happened, the shooting by police of unarmed person. But it's literally the Austin police shot this guy, Mike Ramos, just 4 days ago, he said, on Friday. Someone called the police on a car in a parking lot, supposedly doing drugs. It supposedly had a gun, what the 911 call said. The officers arrived. They found this guy wearing a totally different color shirt, Mike Ramos, put his hands up in the air, and they, the officer fired a beanbag at him while his hands were in the air. Naturally, I mean, I don't want to speculate too much, but were actually shot by the police, your first instinct would be to get to a safe place. So he went back in his car.
Yeah, I mean, you had your hands up, don't have a weapon, and they shoot you with a beanbag. Yeah, why would you stand there and say, "Oh, can I please have something a little bit higher caliber"?
To be fair, Bob, he was threatening, with his blackness and all. he wasn't unarmed.
I think it was actually Latino. But yeah, it's the same point. It's the same white supremacy. But yeah, like they just summarily executed this guy for the call and whatnot. Anyway, like this happened. The important thing to me is this happened just 8 days after the release of yet another report from the city of Austin showed systemic racism, sexism, bigotry, and homophobia in Austin PD, from kind of the lowest level of the police academy and the cadets, all the way, largely, I would say, implicating the police chief himself and everywhere in between. And then the Mayor Adler's response, which just came out, that we may not know all the facts. We need to know all the facts before we pass final judgment. I told the manager that we need a quick and complete assessment of the shooting. And it's like his whole thing is we need another study. Looks like we've had study after study after study. Austin police, in particular, has made national news for their scandals involving this and that around racism, around the lack of testing for rape kits. Like, it happens over and over again. So we need more studies, whether that's Austin or whether whether that's, again, like the task force that Joe Biden.
Yeah. And to your point earlier, like, we don't need more studies on what's wrong with housing in America. It's the fact that homeless people aren't given houses. We don't need more studies on food insecurity. We need more food distributed to low-income communities. There are no needs to continue to study policing in America. Give somebody a gun, give them absolute power, and then tell them every brown and black person they see is a criminal. You're going to create a lot of these shooting incidences. And the work that needs to be undone in the heads of police officers and the American populace around policing is a lot of work. We're deeply conditioned into trusting police. That's me speaking as a white person, to be able to understand that not all police are heroes, as Nancy Pelosi was on CNN this weekend talking about the hero police officers and all the work they've been doing. We need to break through some of those narratives if we're going to have an honest and truthful conversation about what is taking place. And if we're actually going to address these issues, you need Joe Biden's of the world speaking up and speaking out on it. But I don't see Joe Biden doing that anytime soon. We have time for just one more caller before we turn to our weekly Wednesday Miss the Press segment. I believe DJ is on the line. DJ, are you here with us on Political Misfits?
Yes, I'm on the line.
Hey, DJ, what's on your mind today?
Oh, yeah. I'm just kind of shifting gears from the police brutality conversation. It's in regard to Bernie Sanders being removed from the ballot. I think that it's interesting that there was some sort of legislation signed. Not legislation, excuse me. There was
a budget bill signed by Cuomo.
Excuse me. Yeah, that's it. It's earlier this month, removed him, and this is all happening while there's the effort to remove Biden has become more concerted. I believe that they believe themselves that Biden will not be on the ticket. I don't think that his position is secure, and that's why these sort of maneuvers are taking place.
Let me ask you one question. Wait. Let me ask you one question. That, like Bob, that's pretty bold. That is pretty bold. What does that look like to you? What does that process look like of removing Joe Biden? And do you think Joe Biden is going to willingly go along with that? This man has only been president for like 40 years. How does that look? They're going to rip that from Joe Biden.
I don't think that they would really be able to. I don't think that he would put up a lot of resistance, honestly, because of everything that's going on. He doesn't seem to want a lot of the media scrutiny in general. And when you have these claims, that Tara Reid claim, that's really, really bad. And that phone call from her mom, and it's crazy. It's almost poetic because her mother's dead and she's protecting her from the grave with that sort of revelation. I don't think that there's
really good point.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for the call, DJ. We'll talk about that at the end of the hour. This latest breaking-ish news here. An uncovered tape about Tara Reid, the person who was accusing Joe Biden of sexual assault. Her mother had called into the Larry King show. We'll tell you more about that and much more. We're going to take a quick break here on Political Misfits before we come back with our weekly Monday segment, Miss the Press. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.
Deshaun, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now, the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. And on Mondays, we bring you Miss the Press, our weekly Monday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time segment where we take a look at the worst of the Sunday morning talk shows and mostly make fun of Chuck Todd. Oh, yeah, making fun of Chuck Todd. Meet the Press here on Radio Sputnik. I'm Bob Schlehuber. I'm here kind of sort of still with my co-host Jamarl Thomas, and we continue to be joined by Brianna Griffith, producer and host of the radio show People's Republic. Well, I previewed it at the beginning of the segment, the making fun of Chuck Todd of Meet the Press thing, so let's jump right into it. We start this week's Miss the Press segment with Chuck Todd interviewing Deborah Birx, the doctor at the White House in charge of the coronavirus response. Chuck Todd starts by asking Dr. Birx about Trump's suggestion that people try drinking disinfection. Here, let's have a listen.
Dr. Birx, help me understand what happened with the suggestion that the president made that the task force study disinfectant injections. You said he was digesting information at the time when that came out of his mouth. Do you have any more information, and are you concerned that people might take bleach because of what the president said?
Jamarl, for me, this is a fine question, right? But it could have been asked 3 days ago. And my other frustration with Chuck Todd, nobody's watching Meet the Press that cares about what Donald Trump said in some serious way. Those aren't the people watching the show. So you're asking Dr. Birx a question 3 or 4 days after the story already ran. My dad, who I never talked to, sends me a joke about it. Everybody's made a joke about it. It's the funniest thing in the world. The guy said, drink disinfection. And yet, Chuck Todd, you spend meaningful, impactful moments with Dr. Birx, and instead of asking her a legitimate, serious question about what people should be doing, how people can respond, by holding the administrations accountable in some way, but instead you simply said, isn't Trump an idiot? He said something stupid again. This is why Republicans hate Democrats like Chuck Todd, because they're always so focused on scoring intellectual points as opposed to getting policy work done. They're so focused on making fun of Donald Trump, which, sure, go ahead and make fun of the guy, but where is that getting you, Chuck Todd? And I just thought it was outdated, it was old, and then you give her 3 days, Dr. Birx, to basically prepare a response. And then she actually has a response that said, oh, the guy was just talking through things, and then you let him off the hook. So once again, Chuck Todd, so excited and giddy to ask the same question everybody's asked the last 3 days, to ask this question that gets us nowhere. What's the point of bringing her on and asking her these questions? Brianna, for me, it's this constant frustration with the Chuck Todds of the world and the liberal Hollywood-esque people that are more concerned with making fun of how dumb Trump supporters are than they are actually understanding those people or trying to find other policies or routes forward that would unite the country, because that's what they always say they're there for. The Meet the Press is to unite the people of America, but instead they just point fingers and laugh at these folks.
It's kind of it's a recurring theme, really, where it's more about the smugness of knowing, quote unquote, knowing you're smarter than the other side. That does dominate kind of particularly these corporate media space and whatnot, and those who most closely follow them. I mean, it reminds me of so many ways of like this of the Bush administration. It's that same thing of always fact checking and always pointing out when he said something stupid or whatnot. But it's like if you're like the other person, you lost to this guy. Like, if he's so stupid and he's saying things that are so easily fact checked, and you lost to him, what does that say about you? That like, if you're not really. It to me shows that they're not really putting sort of the actual needs of people in the country first. If they're more interested in scoring these points against the quote unquote stupid people, they are actually looking at the problems that people are facing and whatnot. Like you're not putting forward like a strategy to win, get better quote unquote, get better people in office and whatnot. If you're not actually winning these elections, when you do win elections, you're not putting forth better public policy. But instead, it's just all about like just these owns, whatever the case is, these really tepid owns. Like you're to me as irresponsible as like the Trump and the right wingers saying drink bleach or whatever the case is.
But see, Brianna, I would make the argument that this is kind of the politics or the circus of distraction. Like if you think back to what mainstream media has done over the last 20, 30, 40 years. Has it really been to inform the public on the things that would benefit the public? Or has it just been this kind of political theater of the 1%? Like Chuck Todd is never going to go hungry. Chuck Todd is never going to be without a house. Chuck Todd may do heroin at some point in life. So I can't necessarily know that as a flat fact. But all things being equal, Chuck Todd would be perfectly okay. So the concerns of Chuck Todd go into minutia like this, just ridiculousness, as opposed to, for example, there's a story that Bob mentioned, and the Pentagon saying, "Hey, we're going to do a flyover." Well, do you want to do a flyover, or do you want to make sure people are made whole by getting like 80% of their paychecks? Like,
yeah, flyover
there's a difference
to honor essential workers. A flyover in U.S. cities to honor the brave men and women who are doing the essential work. So yeah, Jamar, we're going to spend Pentagon money, U.S. taxpayer money, when we can't even get the vast majority of people checks to their wallets to help them out right now.
Exactly, and you would think that Chuck Todd would bring that person on, and they would say, "Hey, what's better? Having this kind of show that you guys are going to spend all that money on, or just giving the audience the money that you guys were going to spend for the show?" But Chuck Todd doesn't do that. Because Chuck Todd is not worried about workers' benefits, or he's not worried about, a Social Security check or something like that. Chuck Todd will be okay.
Yeah, and there too, and it's like, I mean, Chuck Todd, like, aren't you concerned that people will drink disinfectant? It's like, yeah, dude, people are really not on top of things, and they saw a spike in calls to poison hotlines asking if it was possible to try disinfectant. It's like, Chuck Todd, go meet some people, go meet everyday people outside your little bubble. A lot of people don't know what's going on, and you should be, I don't know what we should do with those folks. I don't want to just like marginalize people that aren't very well educated, because there's reasons for that. But at the same time, like, yeah, Chuck Todd, there's a wide array of Americans out there. It's not all rosy and easy like you try to pretend it is. I do want to play a second clip here. This is on a much more serious note. This time it is a clip from CNN's State of the Union with Jake Tapper. Here, Jake Tapper asked Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House there for the Democrats, about the money being used thus far to help support the American people. Speaker Pelosi highlights a few things Americans are expecting from the bailout money. Let's have a listen.
They want their check. Where's my check? My direct payment, my unemployment check, and the checks from this PPP. They have all not gotten them, and we have to have oversight as to how quickly that should be moving. And the third thing they do not want, what they do not want is any taxpayer dollars at this difficult time being used by the big entities that receive billions of dollars for anything other than keep people at work. They don't want to see any buybacks, any corporate increases in pay, bonuses, dividends, and the rest of that. That makes them very angry.
I like that she's just talking to these folks as if they're not connected to her in any way. Where the check, Nancy Pelosi, you're the one. You wrote the you signed the bill.
You voted for
the bill. Where's
I'm
the
sitting
check?
here listening to this. I'm like, wait a minute, you voted for this. You bought
Where are
it
the
up in the
checks?
House and signed it.
Tell us where the checks are, Nancy. You're the one that are basically allowing Trump to go forward and push these leaderless checks forward at $1,200. And then on the back end, you're like, where are the corporations stealing the money? Don't they know the Democrats in office? Like, aren't you the ones that are allowed these lobbies in, who have sold your party to these corporations, have allowed endless money to flow into the political process? But now all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, we don't want to upset the people out there, Brianna, because the people sure don't like when we're friendly with the corporations. Well, of course we're going to do it in closed doors, but they surely don't want us to see it out there in public. Give me a break, Nancy Pelosi. You can't be putting yourself out there as some leader for the people when you clearly haven't with these bills that you've put out. And you've had a lack of leadership by putting out House bills to at least challenge what's even happening by the Republicans.
I mean, the Democrats, like, they always do this when they're the quote-unquote opposition party. They're not really an opposition party ever. Whenever they're the minority party and whatnot, it's always this sort of faux resistance. But, I mean, last time the Democrats were really in power and had, like, a popular mandate, what did they do with it? They passed a Republican health care bill. And it's like there's, they just completely capitulated this entire conversation to this original kind of Republican plan of $1,200 checks from most struggling people, except for the people who were going to exclude from that. And it's like, when you're not putting forward sort of an alternative vision, or when people who do have an alternative vision, such as I think Bernie Sanders was at one point proposing $2,000 a month, the duration of it, he may still be doing that, I'm not sure. But anyway, when you're shooting down the other visions of something that's actually better, you're accepting the Republican vision of kind of what's possible. You're voting for the Republican vision of what's possible. And then after it's voted on, after it starts going out, you're all of a sudden so concerned, oh, no, people don't want to see this money going here, here, and here. Well, again, like, you're the person who put that out there.
Well, I mean, on top of it, Jamal, we had briefly mentioned last week that Joe Biden was reaching out to Larry Summers, the great friend of Jeffrey Epstein at one point. And so basically you're saying Nancy Pelosi, who has now endorsed Joe Biden, the highest elected official in office to endorse Joe Biden, she's basically saying, oh, no, we're going to fight for the people. But then you have Joe Biden reaching out to the worst of these financial quote unquote experts who are just trying to privatize more of the economy.
I don't think the Democratic Party very much cares about what the public thinks. I think they did this shuck and jive dance going back to FDR, and they used the momentum of FDR in order to keep the language very similar, while at the same token moving further and further to the right. And because there were only two parties in the United States, the left and the considered to be the left and the right party, well, by definition, just because they weren't the right-wing party, they considered them to be the left-wing party, missing the point that you can have two right-wing parties, which is basically what you end up having. Just because they use the language, it doesn't necessarily mean they're doing it in fact. And I think that's where the issue comes in. They don't care. They assume that they're going to be people who are so terrified of Trump that they are just going to vote for Biden. And Biden assumes that lefties you have nowhere else to go, and they keep the same modus operandi. Honestly, until that's broken, nothing changes. Because up to that point, you can always scare people into backing your candidate, who for the most part, like, say for the moment, just thought experiment. Joe Biden wins this election. Let's say 1 million people die because of Trump. Joe Biden wins the election. Joe Biden privatizes Social Security. He passes the Trans-Pacific Partnership. You end up in 2024. And the people say, well, you got to vote for Joe Biden because Ted Cruz is a monster. It's like, when he privatized Social Security, yeah, I know that, but Ted Cruz is a monster. He's worse. He's the least worse. Like, it would be the same argument. Like, this goes on forever in perpetuity. And at some point, lefties have to realize you're being conned. You have two right-wing parties that is running a game on you. Am I wrong?
Their early prediction there by Jamal Thomas, Ted Cruz.
No, I don't think. No. I mean, it was
No, I'm just
postulated
joking
that 1
with you,
million
Jamal.
people died. Let's just make sure that was postulated.
Brianna, let me just spend our last minute, just have a couple minutes with you left there. As we mentioned, Ted Cruz. I want to talk to you about the state of Texas here. The new polls out show Donald Trump up by 5 points. He did win Texas by, I think, 9 points or so over Hillary Clinton, but up 5 points in early polls from the state of Texas. But to Jamal's point, you're basically having Joe Biden go out there and say, well, again, I'm not Donald Trump, but a lot of Hispanic and Latinos have major problems with Joe Biden. I'm curious what his chances there early on with a minute left here for him to win Texas.
By Governor Tony Evers to be lifted.
I mean, I have seen some people basically trying to make that argument, we have to defeat Trump. I've seen some kind of poor and working people kind of make that argument. But generally, I don't think, like, it didn't work in 2016. It's not going to work now. And I think to kind of Jamal's comment on, like, sort of people need to realize this. Well, I think people are realizing this. I think that, I mean, the status quo right now, broken. There's no returning to it, even if everybody in the country wanted to. The economic, social, and political upheavals right now are too big for us to go back. And I think more and more people are realizing that. Some people may vote for Biden. Some people, I think a lot of people will break. Biden may win. Trump may win. But regardless, there's no status quo. There's no, like, pre-2016 status quo coming ever again. Like, the world has changed and people are changing with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, we are out of time here with Brianna Griffith, producer and host of the radio show People's Republic. Brianna, how can folks find more of your work?
People can find People's Republic on Facebook and Twitter under the handle of People's Radio ATX. You can also find People's Republic by going to Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are potted. Just type in People's Republic.
Brianna, thank you again for your time. With that, we turn to a break after our weekly Miss the Press segment here on Political Misfits. And remember, as always,
you check top.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. We're down to the last 14 minutes of the show. And so we want to get to a few stories that we didn't necessarily get the opportunity to get to just because we had a schedule change. One of the most recent and interesting stories that have come up, and my producer has given me a little bit of information that is apparently has just broken. So let's start here first. Additional information was released on the Tara Reade story. Now, Tara Reade is the woman who said Joe Biden abused her. I think it was back in '93. Tara Reade had told various people about this, including her mom. And her mom, apparently, a video was just aired for Larry King going back to '93. What Reade is saying is her mom calling into Larry King, asking her what to do about the situation. Let's hear the clip.
Yes, hello. I'm wondering what a staffer would do besides go to the press in Washington. My daughter has just left there after working for a prominent senator and could not get through with her problems at all. And the only thing she could have done was go to the press, and she chose not to do it out of respect for him.
Or she had a story to tell, but out of respect for the person she worked for, she didn't tell it.
That's true.
Now, but these are the people who do come to the Lois Romanos, right? The staff worker who says, I want to let you know about what's going on.
Basically, Reade is saying, this was my mom. Now, as the caller said, it is something, ironic is not the right word for it, poetic about it maybe, where her mom, making this call back in '93, comes back, 30 years later almost, in order to corroborate the story of her daughter. And corroborate it only in a sense, not that her mom was there, but more so that something happened here. And in something happening here, I relayed this information to people who I cared about so they would know what was going on. It's almost like a black hole. Physicists can't necessarily see a black hole directly, but you can see the accretion disk around it. And so you can see all of this stuff around the black hole to give you some indication that the black hole exists. Same thing with this. Meaning the fact that all of these people were aware of it means at the very least she told somebody about it. She was bothered by it. This new article came out about an hour ago. Thank you, Michelle. A former neighbor of Joe Biden's accuser, Tara Reade, has come forward to corroborate her sexual assault account, saying Reade discussed the allegation in detail in the mid-1990s. Here's the catch. If all of these Democrats are telling me that Brett Kavanaugh was uniquely guilty and that Ford was believable and that they were going to wear these signs that I trust women, they're raising the fist and all that good stuff, great. Then the same thing should be true here. You can't change you can't be a hypocrite, especially to this level of hypocrisy. And again, this is why Republicans hate Democrats, this level of hypocrisy. How do you give Joe Biden a pass on something like this after behaving like that with Brett Kavanaugh? And I even agree with you that Brett Kavanaugh probably did it. But I'm making the point that I do also believe that I believe her. Meaning I don't necessarily have any entire reason to distrust her, even though I don't necessarily immediately jump to this notion that Biden is guilty. It's kind of dancing between the raindrops. But I guess my point is I'm not going to discount her story, and nor should Democrats be able to discount her story in this way. Bob, is this why Republicans dislike Democrats? I mean, basically a level of hypocrisy. I'll give you another example. You would have Barack Obama, who would lock up one whistleblower after the next. And then immediately after locking up all of these whistleblowers, Trump's get in office. And what do they say? We must protect the noble whistleblowers. They say this within the first, maybe a month of Trump's administration. Like, the level of hypocrisy on this stuff is astonishing. If it's my party, I give it a pass. If it's the other people's party, it's the most important thing in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I said that the same kind of feeling I had towards the Russiagate stuff. I was telling people it felt a lot like Benghazi, and obviously the stuff with Benghazi and the deaths of Ambassador Christopher Stevens was much different than what happened with the Russiagate stuff, with this kind of endless witch hunt that never was going to stop. There was going to be endless committees. They were always going to turn over endless amounts of rocks and look for it. And then you basically said, look, you were the ones that complained about how often the Republicans brought up Benghazi, and it was a fool's errand just to distract the populace from what was taking place on a day-to-day. Right. And then the Democrats come forward and for years push this Russiagate narrative at the point of distraction from everyday things that were actually impacting people's material conditions. And so who are you as the Democrats to point fingers and say, oh, are the Republicans such obstructionists, when you have done absolutely the same thing in many ways? Back to this thing with Tara Reade. I've said this last week and I'll say it again, and it's very difficult to kind of parse the difference because you want to believe people in all these situations, and everybody absolutely has a right to be heard. But Jamal, you mentioned the Christine Blasey Ford story and Brett Kavanaugh. These people were drunk in their late teens is one kind of story. And as you mentioned, the national press ran with it. There was congressional hearings. It was one of the most watched things. Saturday Night Live did a spoof of Kavanaugh crying on the stand, asking Klobuchar if she liked beer despite her dad being an alcoholic. It was one of the most crazy, entertaining days of Washington, D.C. I've ever been a part of. But now here you have a woman who is well into her adult career telling her mother, telling a neighbor, telling others about a time she was sober with another adult who was sober I guess I don't know if any of them were sober, but I'm assuming they were all sober, but at congressional offices, and this happens, and that's dismissed. I mean, you have somebody like, I still can't imagine Al Franken sitting basically saying, wait a second. I got kicked out of the Democratic Party for photos of me grabbing somebody's butt in what I was trying to be funny about, even though it's not funny to assault people. So no, Mr. Franken, you were absolutely wrong in doing that. But he gets kicked out. But Joe Biden somehow gets to be the Democratic nominee for president.
Complete pass.
With all of this out there.
Complete pass. And by the way, one of the other things that was noted in the New York Times piece was that her job did change almost immediately around the time that she was talking about, meaning people who were there noticed that she no longer was performing the same job capacity after this particular event took place. So, I mean, it's one of those things where all sorts of, you could say, evidence is at the very least cooperating evidence is there. And it's so weird, like the level to which they are breaking their back to ignore this. And by the way, they're not going to be able to ignore it because Donald Trump is going to be screaming to high heaven about it. And the fact that the president is screaming about it, they're not going to be able to ignore it.
Yeah, no, incredibly scary. A younger woman, mid-20s there, Tara Reade at the time of the incident. But again, a different setting, a different place. There's nothing about her story that is less believable or even able to check than the Christine Blasey Ford allegations, maybe, is my point. Is there's enough there to lead whatever threshold of limit to basically have this person's voice heard, and you're seeing other people start calling him out. I mean, Alexander Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders have been rather loud on these issues, and we'll just see. I mean, again, as the campaign revs up, as there's news to be had on the campaign, Biden's not going to be able to distract from this. This is going to be the major story, and it's just a matter of time that it becomes the major story where everyone starts talking about it, Jamal. And I think that's going to happen. I don't know how they bury this one. They can bury it early. They can get him plenty of money right now, but long term, this is going to come back and haunt him. Jamal, I just want to get a couple other stories in here today. I just was not surprised, but seeing the story about Israel, their company Coresight AI just was able to raise $5 million from a Canadian venture capital firm focused on intelligence and surveillance technology to develop and promote Coresight's facial recognition technology that can detect faces covered by masks, goggles, or plastic shields. Coresight says its system can process faces caught on video or in photos, even if more than 50% of the face is covered by a mask, according to the story in Jerusalem Post. A Chinese company in March said it had developed similar technology, hashtag Hong Kong protests. I was going to give a shout out to the protesters. They're not allowed to cover their face in Hong Kong, but go ahead and cover them again. China's got you covered. A representative from Coresight's parent company, Cortica, gave the new system a positive spin, Jamar, so maybe it's not all for nefarious state operations. They say, quote, "The idea is that face recognition will replace many surfaces that require physical touch. For example, opening doors in offices, fingerprint timestamps, or for doctors wearing masks who touch door handles when they need to go from room to room."
Or shooting people in the face. Or shooting people in the face. Or that. I mean, that's what it's going to be used for. Let's be honest.
No, absolutely. I mean, and just laughing at the software. I mean, we've covered stories here on Radio Sputnik before about how the software wasn't able to differentiate skin tone.
Yeah.
And was having troubles basically scanning black people. And the same with those like I don't know if you've ever had this experience yourself, Jamal, but hand machines that are triggered by your hands wouldn't actually pick up darker skin tones.
Interesting. No, I have never had that issue. At least I don't think I have. I mean, like, I don't know how I would know as opposed to
somebody else. You thought it was broken. You just thought it didn't work. The whole thing was racist.
Like, I would have just thought, oh, that's weird. This thing doesn't work. It would have never occurred to me. Like, you need comparison, right? Like, you would need, like, Bob, how does that work for you like that all the time? Outside of that, there's no way to know.
Yeah, and so obviously they'll use this for their surveillance state there. They'll target more Palestinians and any of those folks that remain in the left dissenting against the right-wing government in Israel. Jamal, just the other last story here on the tech news. Apple and Google, they're trying to figure out their privacy settings for a new app that would help them track and trace COVID-19 cases. I'm curious, Jamal, would you download an app by Google? Oh, really?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, I think that's creepy. I get creeped out when Google says stuff like, hey, Jamal, you have a flight in 2 hours. And I haven't added anything to Google about it. Like, it's like perpetually scanning you because I know that they're going to use this for advertisement. Like, I know this is not entirely just for my best interest. Google is a company. They're trying to monetize it like any other company. And they're using my own information for their own ends. So I look at this stuff as being, this kind of capitalistic incentive behind it that is not necessarily looking out for my well-being. They're looking out for their own interests.
Yeah, well, maybe capitalism will rule the day. There's roughly 260 million Android and iPhone smartphone users in the United States, and a recent information survey done by SmartBrief in its While You Were Working newsletter showed that nearly 1/3 of respondents were willing to use a contact tracing app for COVID-19. So, Jamal, you might not want to use it, but clearly 85 million Americans said they would be on board to use it. We'll have
curious,
more.
What is that supposed to do, though? Like, it just says, okay, there's a coronavirus person here. Like, what's the objective of the app?
Yeah, I think it's just to show like where somebody had it, and then if you were in that location, and the idea was to be able to quickly trace your contacts, remember where you went, and notify and inform people. Well, Jamal, we'll have to notify and inform the listeners out there on Political Misfits that we're at the end of our day. We'll be back with a brand new show tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Big thanks to our guests today, Arnold August and Brianna Griffith. Thank you to our radio engineers, Ryan, Dimitri, Andre, and Saul, and the entire Sputnik News team. Shout out to our fantastic producer, Michelle Whitty, as always. On behalf of Jamal Thomas and myself, Bob Schlehuber, thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.
Guys, as always, I appreciate you guys coming to the show. Let's see, we have chats. Josephine Perlini, they removed Bernie from the ballot in New York. This must have been earlier. They removed him from the ballot in New York. Yes. It was broken. I appreciate it. I didn't get the chance to see this one, but I did. I appreciate it. Constitutional, Journal. Thank you for the show, Jamal. Thank you for watching. I care more about the fact that you guys are watching, so thank you very much. All right, guys, you will probably see me later on. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.